Welcome to Navigating Life After 40, the podcast that's all about helping women navigate this exciting and sometimes challenging phase of life. I'm your host, Roni J, and I'll be here sharing some of my own personal experiences, chatting with experts and a few friends, and also providing some practical advice and support to help you live your best life after 40. Let's get started. All right, welcome back everyone to another episode of Navigating Life After 40. I am your host, Roni, and I am here today with Coach Steph, who is a registered dietitian, personal trainer, and a mindset transformational coach. How are you today, Coach Steph?
I am fantastic. Thank you so much for having me.
Nice. I am very delighted to have this discussion with you today. Because we have a lot of women who are really trying to navigate their health and their mindset, and they are trying to find different ways to do so. And so we felt like this would be a great conversation to have with an expert, and so that we can kind of also, get some education and also debunk some of these myths that we are hearing a lot about or seeing women doing as well. And we'll touch on those in this episode. To kick things off, we'll start a little bit about your journey. Can you share what led you to become a registered dietitian and a personal trainer and coach, and how this path has led you to create your program called the Fit Figure Formula?
So I am an athlete. So I played basketball from probably fifth grade up until college. And I always knew I felt in flow when I was on a basketball court. When I hear like the little squeaking of the tennis shoes on a floor, I feel like I'm at home. It feels great to me. And I haven't played basketball in years, but I grew up playing basketball. That was my sport. Went to college on a scholarship, was able to play basketball. And of course, going into my junior year, they're like, hey, you got to pick a major. You can't just be undeclared. So I was like, okay, I don't know what I wanted to do. And I felt like all of the athletes were Kines majors. And I was like, I don't want to do that. That's too cliche, whatever. And so because I like science, when I went to the career counselor, she was like, hey, nutrition is an option. You can be a dietitian. I didn't know what a dietitian actually did, but I knew that I was interested in the body, interested in nutrition, interested in health. And so I thought I was going to be a clinical dietitian, which meant that I would work in hospitals, nursing homes, and I did that when I first came out of school. But what I found out when I started trying to counsel patients at the time was that the science of it was interesting to me, but it wasn't really what the client or patient needed to get from point A to point B. They needed behavior change and they needed mindset transformation. So that's kind of what started my journey, that realization that people need more than just the what to do. They need to how do I need to think about this? How do I need to think about myself? So that kind of started it off.
And that is so important. I think a lot of times people jump in and then they wonder why sometimes there are all of these setbacks along the way. But there's a lot of mindset work that needs to be done. And I think a lot of people don't take that into consideration when they start their health and fitness journeys, that it's a mindset thing. It's not a quick fix thing. How can I change my mindset and work on that so that this success, that it lasts a long time versus being something that's just kind of quick. So I love that you made it about that and understanding that it's the mindset thing first, because everything begins with the mindset, of course,
Right.
everything.
And I coach perfectionists. So that the reason why I even niched down to people who identify as perfectionists was because of the all or nothing mindset, lots of negative self-talk about your body. And so it was like, we got to clean all of this stuff up. The food is easy once you can clean all the rest of that up. So that's just what I found.
Nice. And you kind of leading me into this next question, which is really what inspired you to specifically focus on helping women midlife with their health and fitness goals?
So as I'm getting older, right, I turned 40 last year. And
welcome.
Hello, I'm here. So in my mind, because I always felt like, okay, I am fit. I'm an athlete, and these things that people are talking about are not going to happen to me, you know?
Yeah.
And so as I'm aging, I'm like, oh, this is what y'all were talking about. Okay. So, and then also because I'm a Black woman, a lot of my clients, most of my clients are Black women who are also around my age, not to mention that I'm mostly on Facebook. And so,
Hmm.
our age and demographic are a lot on Facebook. But again, what I think I found was that I was trying to approach helping people with their nutrition from a scientific background. And that's great, but they needed behavior change. They needed a way to think about their nutrition themselves. I transitioned from being a clinical dietitian, working in hospitals, nursing homes, long term care, things like that, into coaching because I was on the internet and I was like, how are these people like helping other people? Like, what is this about? This is several years ago. And I just didn't understand. How are y'all doing this? Like, what are y'all doing? And so I reached out to people on Instagram, like girls that I saw that were having a business. I was like, what is this? And so I was actually a co coach in another girls program for a while that kind of taught me the game of like, okay, this is how you build a program. And so I have been slowly building a mindset curriculum that takes you from one way of thinking about yourself to thinking about yourself in your highest and best self. And then coupled that with my background in nutrition, teaching ladies about how to eat. Because a lot of times we're just like, okay, I'll just intermittent fast, or I'll just cut out a meal, or I'll just, cut out carbs. And it's because we don't really understand how to put together a meal for ourselves or how to put together a day meal plan for ourselves. And so we just cut stuff out. And a lot of times that's unsustainable. So that's what I help my clients do, is to put together the entire piece. It's kind of like a life coaching slash nutrition program. We talk
Hmm.
about all the feelings, all the all the self-sabotage that comes up that sometimes runs so deep. And
Yeah.
I am not a therapist. And I tell my client, listen, I am not a therapist. But they're like, oh my God, this is just like therapy. Or it can feel vulnerable sometimes. But like that's the stuff that we kind of got to work through, even at 40, because some people have a lot of shame around, like, I'm still dealing with this, issue. And I'm like, there was no timeline. You're right where you need to be.
Yeah. I love that you're doing that. And you called me out a little bit because I am an intermittent fast.
No
I
worries.
am very guilty of that. And I did it, of course, because some years ago, I was like, something is going on, and doctors were not really being helpful. And I was like, let me try intermittent fasting. And I noticed that it did help a lot with inflammation that I experience because I have thyroid problems. And so there is some inflammation that comes. And so I noticed that it helped with that. And then I've also been guilty of cutting things out, like, let me not eat the carbs and let me not have this and let me not have that because it's going to make me fat and it's going to cause inflammation. So I'm curious to know, just a bit of a transition. How should women really take a look at their food that they are eating? Because I see this a lot, and I'm in a lot of groups, I'm in a lot of fitness groups, and I see people on, as you mentioned, Facebook, and everybody's into these quick fixes. Let me stop eating carbs. Let me jump on the, what is the one? I cannot even think of, where they eat a lot of meat. It was a trend at one point, and I
Maybe
think it's
keto.
kind of keto.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's it, keto. So, how should women really approach their outlook on the foods that they're eating so that they can make better decisions for themselves?
So, one thing that I like to remind my perfectionists is that there is not just one right way, right? So,
Hmm.
we think that there's just one right way. So, this is my philosophy, is that you don't necessarily need to cut out foods or cut out meal times if you understand how to build a day of meals. And intermittent fasting in and of itself is not quote unquote bad. It's just like, what are you eating during your window? Do you know how to hit your macros? Or if you're not counting macros, be in a calorie deficit if you're trying to lose weight. Like, you still have to know that part, because you can still overeat calories and you're only eating in an 8-hour window. You can still overdo your calories. You still have to understand your nutrition, the intermittent fasting part doesn't negate understanding what you eat when you are eating.
Yeah.
So, first things first, there's no one right way, which I know can be kind of frustrating for people. They're just like, tell me one thing to do, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that when you're looking on the internet for information, you have to see what is going to align with my lifestyle and how I want to live, not just what's going to get me to my weight loss goal the quickest. Because as soon as you hit your goal and you start eating at maintenance, you're going to have to do the same things that you did before. So it needs to be enjoyable and you need to actually understand your food. So I think that's one. There's no one right way. But my philosophy is that all foods can fit, that you can eat flexibly, and I teach my ladies how to understand how to plug in your treats and how to make them fit within your day. You don't have to like wait for a cheat day to have ice cream. You can, if you understand how the numbers fit together, then you can plan that in kind of as you go.
Yeah. So it's kind of sounds like it's kind of teaching women how to create balance. You don't have
Right.
to give up all of these foods that you love. It's how do you eat it in moderation and how do you create a level of balance in the meals that you're eating so that you're not overdoing it in one area as opposed to another and you're still hitting your goals and you're able to maintain and this can continue this over time.
That's correct. And I will say this too. So, the balance journey, the lifestyle journey,
Mm-hmm.
is going to look different than the either quick fixes or the diets. So, a lot of times my clients will come in and they want the quick result of the fad diet, but I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, but you don't want to live like that, remember? So I have to keep reminding them
Yeah.
the journey is going to look way different. You might have to be more patient, but you can sustain this longer. It doesn't matter how much weight you can lose, it matters how much you can keep off. So we got to like
Mhm.
a little bit.
Yeah. I think that's a challenge too. And I know you see this a lot. Everybody is they want it and they want it right now. I want the weight loss, but I don't think people really take into consideration how to make it sustainable. And I'm curious to learn from you in terms of what are some common misconceptions or myths about health and fitness and nutrition that women in midlife encounter that you've noticed in your work with them?
So, or nothing is a big mindset self sabotage. It's like I have to
Hmm.
do all the things week one. And then if I can't do everything, then I'm just going to wait until Monday because that somehow is going to be easier or better. It never is. Let's
Raising
just
my
be
hand.
honest. So that's probably the number one thing. So what I do in my program when I have ladies join, the workouts don't start until like week 3.
Hmm.
If you hadn't been working out, you don't have to do all 4. You can just start with 1 or start with 2, right? It doesn't feel your brain's going to be like, that's not enough. That's not going to get me to my goal. But that's where the self sabotage becomes more prevalent because now you're trying to pick up 10 new things and do all 10 things week 1. But by week 3, you're going to be burned out. And so
Yeah.
we don't want to keep burning ourselves out. We want this, we want our brain to be like, okay, yeah, I can do that. So in my program, we take it step by step. I teach them about breakfast week 1, lunch week 2, dinner and snacks week 3. And then we don't get into like actually hitting a macro goal until like week 4 or 5. And it's very stair step. But by the end of 16 weeks, they don't need my help. I'm like, hey, does anybody need any help planning their food? And they're like, nope,
Yeah.
I got it. Because you can actually create so many wins if you take it slow and steady. So don't try to do everything all at one time because what we're doing, we're approaching lifestyle change like a challenge. A 30-day
Hmm.
challenge is a 30-day challenge on purpose because it's not sustainable long term. So you cannot approach your lifestyle change like a challenge because you're going to burn out. And then when you burn out, then you start doing nothing at all and you revert right back to square one. And then it feels like you're starting over. So I think that's probably the biggest thing I see is just like trying to do everything at the same time week 1.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like how you take the women on a journey Each week it's a class, but it's also a journey to understanding or getting to the end point, it seems like. And also helping them in the process change these cognitive distortions that's coming up that is impacting their progress. You mentioned macros a couple of times. I understand macros, but for those who are listening, how can you break that term macros down in a simple term, in an easy way to understand for those who may have never heard of it or they have and they're just like, what is macros? I've heard her say this a couple of times. What exactly are macros?
Sure. So when we talk about calories, we're just talking about a unit of measurement. This is just like how
Hmm.
much energy food has. And so we measure that in calories. So it's kind of like saying an inch or running a mile, right? If I say run a
Yeah.
mile, you kind of know like how long that's going to be. So food has calories or energy, and we get that energy from carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. These are the three ways that we get energy or calories from food. So, food has other micronutrients and things, but none of those contribute to actual calories. So, when we talk about macros, we're really talking about the components of food that contribute and make up the calories. So, I want to say, like back in the day, and people still do this, you just worried about like being in a calorie deficit. But the reason why I coach on macros is because protein is so important, especially at this age where
Hmm.
muscle building is so important and maintaining your muscle is you have to work at that, which means that you have to be lifting heavy enough, often enough. And then you also need to be getting enough protein. And what I see is a lot of ladies are not eating enough protein. So I teach macros because it helps to make sure that you're getting enough protein, that you understand the components of food and how they make up your total calories.
Yeah. I love that explanation. And it's easy to understand because I am one of those people who also, and I'm sure some of the listeners too, we hear a lot about calorie deficit, stay in a calorie deficit, do this, but stay in a calorie deficit. It's almost like they embedded in you, stay in a calorie deficit. And sometimes people don't quite understand exactly what it is. All they know is I need to eat less.
Yeah.
Less than what, you know?
Mhm.
And I think that is another piece of education that a lot of women are missing. They don't really understand. They hear it, but then when I see questions, they're like, okay, so if I eat 1,200 calories, what are you telling me to eat? 700? They don't really understand um, what that really entails. And so, how do you teach your women to really understand what calorie deficit is and how to really incorporate that? Or, so let me add the or to it. Or is it just more of the macro focus because that macro focus will put you in a calorie deficit on a daily basis? Do I have that right or one or the other? How do you help women with that?
Okay, so kind of my philosophy is number one, calorie deficits are a little bit overrated. Okay, so
Okay.
this is like a controversial take on calorie deficits because what I think a lot of people don't understand is that you have a calorie deficit if you want to lose fat, right? That means you're eating less calories than your body actually needs, but your body starts to adapt to that just like anything else. If I go into the sun and I'm like at the beach and I stay all day, I'm going to get a tan, right? My body's going to
Yeah.
adapt to the environment. So the same way, like the environment of how many calories I'm intaking, how much stress I have, how much sleep I'm getting, my body is trying to keep me safe and keep me around the same. So if I drop my calories to 1,200 calories, which is severely low for adults, for most adults, then my body's going to start to adapt. Now, one way you might lose weight, right? But
Hmm.
then it also starts to slow down your metabolism because your body just starts to conserve energy. You're not moving as much. You get really tired and lethargic, and you don't realize this is happening, but you're not actually moving as much. And then it becomes even harder. So then, now that your body has adapted to 1,200 calories, it's now no longer a calorie deficit. Now, when your metabolism starts to slow down, oh, that's not a calorie deficit. And technically, you'd have to go even lower, which is typically unsustainable.
Yeah.
So, the reason why it's important to understand diet phases is because increasing your calories is called reverse dieting. And you typically do this about 100 calories per week, every 2 weeks. And you are intentionally increasing your calories from your calorie deficit up to your maintenance point. And this is really important when you're coming out of a fat loss phase because now you are a smaller person, right? Like, say you lost 50 pounds. Well, now you're no longer whatever weight you were, you're 50 pounds less, and now your maintenance calories are different. But you don't know what that number is because no one ever tracks that maintenance.
Yeah.
As soon as they hit their weight loss goal, they just stop. So I think it's really important that when you're coming out of that calorie deficit and you're fueling your body, this is going to help your metabolism, your hormones. It's going to help you build more muscle because you can't build muscle in a calorie deficit, and track at maintenance. And you can, I think that maintenance calories is very underestimated, overlooked. So I think that just educating my clients on the fact that if you actually want to look quote unquote tone or you want to build muscle, you're going to have to eat at maintenance or a bit of a surplus, which is a mind hack in and of itself to get my clients to eat more because they constantly think less is better. And that's not
Yeah.
always true.
Yeah. Yeah. And you debunked a, I guess I don't want to call it a myth, but like this fad, I would say, that's going around because that is all I see. Calorie deficit. And I'm sure other women too, because I'm in these groups and they're just calorie deficit, calorie deficit. And to hear you say that it's overrated and these are the things that you should be working on, I think it's an eye opener because a lot of women don't know that. All we know is what we're continuing to hear. You got me thinking now. You got me thinking about my own self. Like, okay, girl, you got to work on this because I know for me, I've been thinking about that too. Is how do I stay in a calorie deficit? Because it's something that it's almost like it's what is the word? It's almost like there's this little man sitting on your shoulder telling you, make sure you stay in a calorie deficit, make sure you don't eat above this. And I know at least for me, but that is interesting. That is very interesting to hear different take on it. And that also leads me to this thought that I've always had about a lot of trainers because I know a lot of trainers are not well versed on nutrition. They may know the basics, but they're not as well versed as someone with your background, your skill set in dietitian. And so they teach these things about, calorie deficit or making sure that you're eating this many grams of protein. And I forget, I think it's like 0.1% of the goal you're trying to reach or something I'm hearing. And I'm just like, that is a lot. So for somebody that wants to be 150 pounds, they have to eat 150 grams of protein a day. How?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Um, so, and before we move on, I'm just curious to hear, like, what do you think about that when you hear these influencers out here, fitness influencers or trainers, and they're saying, hey, you need to consume this many grams of protein a day. And I keep hearing 150 a lot. They use that as an example a lot. Is that normal to hit 150 grams of protein, or is that too much for the body to handle?
So, just to be clear, whenever you want to lose fat, if your body is ready for fat loss, and it has to be ready.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's a whole thing. But if your body is ready for fat loss, you have to be in a calorie deficit to lose fat.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like
Okay.
when you're on the internet, I want you to think like, who is this person talking to? I think that's so important because sometimes, yes, a person's audience is talking to someone who wants to lose weight, but you might not be in the position to continue to be in a calorie deficit and lose weight. You may actually need to be listening to someone else who's talking about reverse
Yeah.
dieting and building muscle. So that's one. Number two, getting to 150 grams of protein or whatever your number is. Again, there's not one right number, right?
Okay.
So I always give my clients a range. So whenever we get to like week 4 or 5 and I give them their numbers, because I don't even give them their numbers until like week 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I err on the side, on the lower side. So I multiply zero point 0.6 times their weight, their current weight, typically, depending on where they are. And throughout the course, we move that up as they build the skill to hit their protein goal, because it is a skill. Most of them come in intaking about 75 to 100 grams of protein. That's pretty normal average. And typically 120, 130 is a stretch. So I usually, depending on where they're at, I start them there. And then once they hit that skill, then they learn how to hit 140, 150, or beyond, depending on their actual needs. So the range
Yeah.
that I use is zero point 0.6 up to 1 gram of protein per pound. So basically, if you're far away from your ideal body weight or your goal weight, you err on the lower side, the 0 0.6, 0 0.7, zero point 0.8. If you are closer to your goal weight, then normally you can go to the higher range. But it's a skill to learn. And after week 5 in my program, basically that's what we're working on, is
Okay.
teaching them how to hit their protein goal without going over on their calories. I let their carbs and their fats flex. I don't give them a number to hit, which I think makes it way more flexible, because they are hitting a calorie goal within 100 calories. They hit or exceed their protein goal, and then their carbs and fats can just flex. So that's the way that I teach it. Um, and so it makes it more flexible. They learn, and then it's always kind of a joke. It's like, okay, once they can hit the 0 0.6, 0 0.7, I'm like, okay, let's go up to 0 0.8 or 0 0.9.
Yeah.
And I just move it
Yeah.
up a little bit, because it's just a skill to learn. So,
Yeah.
and just to address what you said earlier about is it too much for the body? If you have healthy kidneys, typically that is not a thing for your like having too much protein to damage your kidneys. So you do want to just be careful if you have kidney issues. But if you're a healthy individual, then it shouldn't really be a problem.
Okay. That makes sense. And it sounds like you take them on these baby steps in the journey to get to a point where excuse me, to get to a point where they can master this. And it's like take the training wheels off and they can, ride that bike. So I do
Exactly.
love how you take them on that, because what I have noticed, even in my own experience, is a lot of times people just throw you in there, eat this 3 times a day or eat this 2 times a day. And you're just like, okay. And that's another reason that sometimes people give up, because one, the food is boring. Two, they don't know what's going on. They're just doing what they're told.
Hmm.
But I'm doing what you're telling me to do. But in my mind, the way my mind works is, why am I doing this? How can this be sustainable long term? And they get you to a certain point, and then you lose all of this weight, but then there's nothing there in terms of maintenance or incorporating these foods back into what you're doing, what you're eating every day. I don't see that often. And that's never been my experience. It's always been the quick fix and boop, you're
Hmm.
done, but it's never what's next. And so we know as women in our 40s, everything is different. We can't, what we did in our 20s and maybe in parts of our 30s, we can't really do that now in our 40s. Um, Eating is different for us, and I might be wrong, correct me, and even working out is different as well. And I'm curious to know, what are some different strategies that you recommend for women in midlife who are really trying to develop those healthier mindsets in these areas? Because we're dealing with maybe menopausal weight gain or perimenopausal weight gain. And for some women, they're like, ooh, I can't have this anymore because the weight doesn't come off as fast. So, what are some strategies or exercises that you recommend for women in midlife going through these areas?
Well, number one, I would definitely say managing your stress, because
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about being in a calorie deficit and eating a 1,200 calorie diet, that's really stressful on the body. And
Yeah.
at some point, that may stop working depending on where your metabolism is, right? And
Hmm.
so, like, our body is sensitive to stress, it's trying to keep us alive, and being in a calorie deficit is stressful. Not getting
Yeah.
enough sleep. Y'all are, some of y'all are not getting your 7 to 9 hours of sleep and scrolling at night with all that light
Lord,
in
she
your face.
preaching.
And guess what? That's stress on the body. Some of us may have like psychological stress with our jobs, our careers, our businesses, and that's again more stress. So, stress at this point is super duper important to manage. And something that we focus on is, what do you do for your mindset? Are you
Yeah.
actually intentionally thinking on purpose? I call it intentional thought creation. And how are you working on your mindset? How are you laughing and having a good time and doing what you like to do because you like to do it? A lot of us get lost and we're not doing anything enjoyable. That's really, really important for your mind and for your body. And then strength training. So I think at some point, we all just thought like cardio was the way to go. And I am not saying don't do cardio. I definitely think there's a place for cardio.
Mhm.
Strength training. And when I say strength training, I don't mean you can start at 5 pounds if you have to start at 5 pounds, but a lot of y'all are just holding on to these 5 pounds and you think 8 pounds is just like way too much. And I'm like, no, girl, you can actually lift heavier than that. That's a major roadblock that I see is they don't want to lift heavier. And a lot of times they're actually doing cardio with weights versus actually strength training. So that rep range of 8 to 12, like you should be failing or close to failure when you get around 8 to 12. That means you have to lift a lot heavier. Again,
Yeah.
muscle building in this stage is really important. So those are some things that I feel like might shift from, when you were doing a cardio, lots of cardio, focusing on that strength training is really important.
Yeah. And what do you say? Because I'm one who I lift heavy. I strength train quite a few days a week. And then I ride my bike maybe opposite days, or if it's not a leg day, then I might go for a walk or ride my bike on like 45 minutes the opposite days. Just depends on what the routine is like. But for a lot of women, they have this thought process that if they lift weights and they lift heavy, they're going to be big and bulky. And so we know that that's not true, but I would love for you to kind of shed some light on that as the expert, because I think to hear from the experts is it's different than to hear from like a friend or someone that like me who just posts on social media, because I see women all the time. They be like, oh, I'm gonna go drink this thing, I don't want to lift weights, I'm gonna drink this stuff and I'm gonna go running and then I'm gonna do this, and then they lose this weight and it's right back. And then when I say you really need to incorporate strength training into your workout, they're like, I'm not trying to get big and bulky. You're not. So, what do you have to say for women who feel like lifting heavy is going to cause them to become this big muscular person?
So I don't know if I coined a phrase. I don't want to say that I did, but I feel like I did. So nutrition will change your size. Working out can change your shape. Mindset changes your lifestyle, right? So if you are worried about getting big and bulky, that doesn't really have as much to do with your workouts as it does with your nutrition.
Mhm.
So I think it's really important that we don't miss the fact that your nutrition is what's going to change your size. And when you're lifting, you are tearing down your muscle. And when those micro tears happen in your muscle, when we eat and when we sleep well, those muscles get repaired with the protein that we're eating and we get to quote unquote build muscle, right? It's kind of like a scab, right? If you were to cut your hand and it's an open wound, but then eventually your body will heal it and there's a scab over it, right? So that's
Mhm.
kind of like how our muscles are or how I describe it. But I think that it's so interesting that we think that building or lifting weights is going to make us bulky, because if you look at a pound of fat and a pound of muscle, like those little replicas, which one's more bulky?
Yeah.
Fat's way more bulky than the muscle. Muscle makes you look leaner. Muscle makes you look more compact.
Yeah.
And the trick is, though, that the scale may not necessarily say what you want it to say as you're building muscle, but you will look more fit. You will look more athletic. You will look more lean, and you will be able to fit in your clothes better when you have more muscle. Matter of fact, you burn more calories if you have more muscle. So, two people that weigh 150 pounds, the person that has more muscle gets to eat more calories because they're burning more calories at rest. They don't have to go do a whole bunch of cardio to burn calories in that hour. They're burning calories around the clock. Why? Because their body's more efficient because they have that active tissue. So there's so many myths. If women only knew that the key to longevity and to looking leaner was to build muscle, you're not going to look bulky. That comes with your nutrition.
Mm. Thank you for shedding light on that. As you were speaking, it made me think about this. See, I gotta stop scrolling on social media. You called me out. I gotta stop doing it. It made me think about a video that I actually saw on Instagram. And they asked these women individually if they could go back and change anything before the age of 40, what would it be? And 9 out of the 10 women said they would have strength trained. They would have lifted weights, and they because they noticed a difference in their body and loss of muscle mass and all of those things as they aged. And I thought that was really interesting. I said, this is really interesting. I'm going to repost this because there are so many women who believe in the myth. I'm going to be big. I'm going to be bulky. Um, so I'm just going to stick to cardio, and I'm going to stick to my 5 pounds and do like they used to do back in the day and do some jumping jacks with these 5 pounds and be like Jane Fonda. Not no shade to Jane Fonda, but thank you for clarifying that, because I think hearing it from an expert in the way that you broke it down for them to understand, and then also say you can eat a little bit more, because women, we love to eat, so that they might like knowing that, like, oh, I can eat a little bit more. Let me go pick these weights up. So, thank you for breaking that down that way so it's easier to understand, and women really have more of a context behind it in the example that you gave. So hopefully those of you listening, you will pick up some weights and know that you are not going to be big and bulky like Hulk Hogan and these other big muscle people. It's actually more helpful than anything else. All right, I want to shift a little bit to talk about hormones and menopause and that area. As I mentioned earlier, our bodies change often, our hormones are all over the place. And this is a question that came in from a listener actually who knew I was going to be having this episode recording coming up, and they wanted to know more about this. So, with our bodies changing, hormonal changes and those type of things, how can women change their diets to help manage these hormonal changes that's happening, to help decrease hot flashes and things like that? Also, is that something that you help women with in your program as well?
So I'm not a hormone expert, but I do have a hormone expert come in and do a guest coaching spot in my group. So her name is
Mm-hmm.
Allie Damron. She's amazing, and that is normally my client's favorite guest coach to come in and talk about the hot flashes, being able to sleep through the night. So I've learned a lot from her. So I can offer some of what I know about that. I think in terms of like your nutrition is really about making sure that you're eating single ingredient foods. So this means real food, right? Something that's not necessarily coming out of a box. And I use the example of like Cheez Its, right? So
Mm-hmm.
Cheez It, you can't go and like farm a Cheez It, right? It is literally a manufactured thing that has been put together and then you eat it. So if you think about like our processed foods that aren't actually food,
Yeah.
this is really important that you are limiting that. Not saying totally eliminate, but are the bulk of your meals made out of whole foods that you could go and eat and pick out of the ground and eat? I think that is extremely important for not only like your weight loss journey, but then your hormone journey as well. So eating real food. And that also entails kind of like planning your food out. A lot of people have a lot of resistance to just sitting down once or twice a week and going through like, what am I going to eat? And
Yeah.
just planning that out. I think we make a lot better decisions when we do that. And I have my clients put that on their schedule. So you need a day on your calendar to plan your meals.
Mhm.
And you need a day to go grocery shopping and then to a day to prep all or something. So not all or nothing, but all or something, even if it's just your snacks. Even if it's just the meal that you know you normally order DoorDash, like maybe it might be
Yeah.
dinner, just prep that meal, right? So making sure that you have that plan that is simple and not overwhelming. Very, very important. Like have that on your calendar. And then I think the reason why I do like coaching on macros is because seeing the numbers, it makes sense. It kind of anchors things. Like if you're looking at it doesn't have to be MyFitnessPal, it can be any tracker that you're using, but you can actually see, oh, okay, if I add nuts, it's going to give me so many grams of protein, so much grams of fat, and you can see the totals. It makes more sense when you understand the number. You can plainly see the numbers, and then you can actually hit your protein goal because you kind of know where you're at. And then you start to adopt some go to protein, some go to meals. And I can teach my clients after this process how to plan their meals in seconds, literally in seconds, because a lot of times we're eating a lot of the same food anyway. And
Yeah.
so don't do a lot of the planning and then start from scratch every week. Like, no, we're not starting from scratch every week. You do this every week. Like we're not starting from scratch. So I think it's just important to have a plan, important to eat single ingredient foods, know your numbers and be able to get enough protein. And I'm sure there are a lot more, but I'll start with that.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. And with doing the planning, I really like the fact that you can teach the women how to do that in seconds because that's amazing.
Listen.
It's amazing because food can get boring, and you're right. We do eat the same things, but how do we change it up? How do
Okay.
we change it up?
So here's my philosophy on that, because here's what I hear is it's boring and I'm eating the same things, or I'm overwhelmed and I can't keep up with all of it. Right. And so there has to be like a middle ground. So my philosophy is this: try one new recipe per week. Right. If you stick to that, week one, you try something new. Week two, week three, week four. When you're in week five, what you tried in week two is no longer new, right? So
Yeah.
it's something that you can roll in. So you're rolling in the new stuff without being so overwhelmed that you have like 10 new recipes to cook and you don't even know if you like those things, and then you make it and then you don't even like it. And that's a whole thing. One new recipe. It's very important for you to start with what you already know how to make. One new recipe per week and roll the variety in. But part of that too is just impulse control, because even if we like plan and prep and it's time to eat, but maybe I've let myself get so hungry that now my brain is like, ooh, I want X, Y, and Z. I want something else other than what I have or what I
Yeah.
planned, what I prepped.
Yeah.
That is the mindset part. You have to be able to
Mhm.
control that impulse. And that's the part that I teach my clients, that mind and emotional management to, oh, okay, if I like this meal and I planned it in and I go and I heat it up and I take a bite, I'll be fine. Do not let yourself get so hungry that now your brain is searching for other stuff. Very important.
Very guilty of that, especially women who are busy. How do you instill that in the busy woman, like the busy working woman, the busy mom? How do you instill that in there? Because if you get so busy, you can forget to eat. So, how do you remind your clients to remember to eat?
So I think one thing is that if you develop a system for yourself, it makes it easier. So again, going back to what I said about the planning part, the grocery shopping and the prepping, that's like having that on your schedule. And then if
Mhm.
you're utilizing my system for just one new recipe per week, everything else is something that you already know how to make. It makes it more simple. You again have to manage your mindset to execute that. But once you get your system going, if you feel like, okay, I've planned my food, I prepped my food, now I just have to work on actually eating it throughout the day because I get so busy and then my brain just turns off and I'm not eating my food. You
Yeah.
can utilize some reminders, take baby steps though. Like, think about what is the meal that you normally skip the most? Is it
Yeah.
lunch? Then hyper focus on making sure that you nail lunch. And then once you get that down, then if breakfast is also a problem, then go and nail breakfast too. Like, it doesn't have to be like I have to eat on a schedule every single solitary day perfectly. Just take what's the biggest issue and work on that one thing. And then when you get that one thing down, then you can go to the next thing. But again, we're trying to do too many things, trying to fix too many things at one time, and it just feels like overwhelming.
Yeah, it's what I'm gathering is you're not gonna eat the whole elephant at one time. You're gonna
Right.
take these small chunks until you devour him. And so I like that approach because I know for me, I know I can get busy and miss lunch. And I'm also the type of person, if it's not in my phone, I'll forget, even though my stomach is growling.
Mhm.
So I had to start putting it in my phone and I put it like, girl, stop, go eat at this time because I know usually I get into a zone and I forget. And so when my phone buzzes to remind me, I stop and I go eat. And I have to do better at that. So I do like that approach that you have. If you know it's lunch, then make sure that you set a plan for lunch. If it's breakfast, set a plan for breakfast. But you have to eat because we know that eating and having food in our bodies is fuel. And
Mhm.
so it also helps us get to those goals.
Yeah.
I love that approach. I love what you're doing. And I love how you're just helping women just eat one small bite at a time. I'm not going to throw all of this at you at once, which is great because it's overwhelming. So you're like doing it in these small little bitty chunks.
Yeah.
That's impressive. I like that. I
It
love that.
it makes it doable. And I like
Yeah.
what you just said about the reminders. And something that I like to do too, like with the reminder. So let's say that you know yourself, which is already really good. You know
Mhm.
yourself. So you're like, okay, I have to have this on my phone. So it needs to be on the phone. But you can also, like, when the alarm comes up, like whether it's like a picture or whether your alarm sound is like a song that reminds you of like how sexy you want to be,
Yeah.
or when you have that reminder, like coupling it with something that really means something to you, your why, even an emotion. Like, I was coaching a client who was skipping her walks for some reason, and we were like, okay, when it's time to do your walk, I want you to anchor into gratitude. You're going to go on a gratitude walk because in the past she had been in a wreck and she couldn't move. She couldn't
Mm.
like get up and do things. And I'm like, no, do you remember that time? I want you to go on a gratitude walk because you can walk, and like coupling it
Yeah.
with a an emotion with those reminders is also a game changer when it comes to actually like getting it done and taking the action.
Yes, that is great. And that leads me to one of your tips that you use, or really tools, is about self love. How does self love and tying that in help to contribute to overall wellness and health and meeting these goals? Because I really love that about gratitude, really finding that one thing, like in the case of the client that you worked with. This is something that you could not do previously. Now you can. How can I remind myself to be grateful and then get up and go for this walk? How do you tie self love into the overall framework that you do with women?
Well, first, I teach what I call a power hour. It's not a hour, I think it's just a cute name, but it is
Mhm.
intentional time every morning or most mornings to think on purpose. And so I take them through this series, and at the beginning, and this is their favorite part, is like it's like a really short, like 3-minute little video. And then they reflect on it inside of my coaching app. They just kind of write about it. And those gratitude or self-compassion or negative self talk, limiting beliefs, perfectionism, right? And so they start to think about themselves differently. And then we graduate to like actually building some gratitude statements for your actual body, because we are always looking for the thing that's wrong. When my clients do their
Yeah.
progress photos, I'm over here like, oh my God, I'm looking for the positive changes. They don't even see the positive changes because they're literally looking for the negative things that they still have to work on, quote unquote, still have to work on. And then when I show them, they're like, oh, I didn't even see that. It's like, oh, you're just looking for the negative to confirm your own bias. So it's so important
Mm.
that we incorporate self love and self compassion along the journey and not wait until we get to a certain scale weight and we think we're going to all of a sudden love ourselves. You're going to have the same brain. Your brain's going to be thinking the same thing. It's going to find something else that's wrong. Oh, I lost the weight, but now my stomach, oh, now I need to tone. It's like, no, like you can love yourself along the way. It's going to be so much more enjoyable, much more sustainable. Your size does not determine your worth. And I think that self love is going to get you farther along than beating yourself up. So you can either, beat yourself up with your thoughts or you can lift yourself up with your thoughts. And you get to choose every day, every thought,
Yeah.
every moment. You get to choose whether or not you're going to vote for your highest and best self or if you're going to vote for just staying the same. So that's part of what I teach my clients.
That's where I like that. It's like the holistic approach. You're looking at everything from this. It's like I'm bringing you full circle. And I don't want you to just think about the food. I want you to think about the mindset. I want you to learn to love yourself. And while you're doing this, you're going to also learn how to take care of yourself in these type of ways. Because when you practice these habits on a daily basis, we know what they say 21 days of doing the same thing helps to develop the habit, right? So you're teaching them things that are long term, sustainable. So even if they are done with your program, these are things that they're still doing. I've learned how to love myself through this. I'm going to continue to learn how to love myself. I'm going to continue to build myself up, talk nice to myself, and incorporate all of these strategies that I've learned. I will say this, and I think I mentioned this earlier. I have never, ever, ever, ever seen a program that incorporates all of these things that you're currently doing with yours. And I think that is amazing. I think it's something that women need because we are hard on ourselves. We are our biggest critics. Most people are, but especially women, because we're always looking for something like, oh, today I'm bloated. Oh, today I'm feeling like this. And we'll focus on that one little bitty thing. And so many great things could have happened that day, but we're just going to focus on the fact that I'm bloated, and let that just be the downfall of our day. And so I love that you're taking the women through an entire journey and you're bringing them full circle to say, you know what? This is something that's great. It's sustainable. I'm going to continue to do this. And it's not a quick fix solution. It's not a quick
Exactly.
fix. And I really appreciate that and really learning a lot more about the work that you're doing to help women love themselves, make more sustainable choices. And then I also loved another thing that you said earlier, which was to do something that you enjoy. We often forget to do that.
Mm-hmm.
We're so busy focusing on everything else, the job. We get off work. I'm fussing at myself. We get off work because we're so tired. We just scrolling on social media or watching TV, or we hop from our job to our side business or go help the kids or do something else. But we never take the time to do something we enjoy.
Right.
And I appreciate also that you encourage your clients to do that for themselves. So thank you so much for having this conversation today. Before we wrap up, are there any tips or advice or last words that you would love to share with our listeners?
Sure. I would just say that your weight loss journey is always an invitation, an opportunity to rise and be your highest and best self. So, for a lot of women who have been struggling with this for a long time, they have a lot of negative thoughts about it. And I just want to encourage you like, maybe this is the invitation. Your weight loss journey is really just mirroring what's happening on the inside. And so
Yeah.
we have to fix that first. And I don't even like to use the word fix. It is just developing a relationship with yourself so that what you said earlier, you're literally just taking care of yourself. You're not like trying to
Mhm.
hurry up and lose weight. This is just how I'm loving myself. This is just how I take care of myself. And by proxy, I'm losing weight. I'm feeling good. My skin
Yeah.
is clear, like all of those things. So, really thinking about it from that lens of like, how do I want to take care of myself? And then because I'm taking such great care of myself, feeding myself well, moving well, I'm losing weight and I'm feeling good.
Yes, I love that. Great words of advice. How can our listeners learn more about your program? How can they follow you? I'm going to also post this in the description as well. So, how can they learn more about your program and where can they find you?
So I hang out a lot on Facebook right now. I have a Facebook group called Weight Loss for Perfectionists. So that is a free group that anyone can join. And I go live every week in that group. I talk about mindset, macros. You can ask me questions and watch the replay. My clients like to watch the replay a lot in that group. And then also, I have a podcast, The Fit Figure Formula. And so I started that on my 40th birthday, matter of fact, last year in September.
Nice.
So that has about 33 episodes right now. So definitely check that out. And then Instagram, I am Stephanie Riles, coach on Instagram. But I'm not as much on Instagram. I go live on my stories a lot. But Facebook is probably better. So y'all find me
Yeah.
on Facebook.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. Like Gen X and millennials,
Oh
we
yeah.
hang out on Facebook. I go on Instagram, but not as much as I am on Facebook. Facebook is my, I don't know, I like to call it my playground of foolishness. So I go there to laugh a lot. So, but thank you so much for being here. I'll also post all of this information in the description so you guys can follow along. And until next time, I will see you later.
Thank you so much.
That's a wrap for this episode of Navigating Life After 40. I hope you enjoyed this conversation just as much as I did. If you love what you're hearing, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling generous, leave me a review on your favorite podcast platform. This helps me to reach more amazing women like yourself who are trying to navigate this amazing life. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, keep living your best life.